WV Uncommon Place. This podcast is a variety podcast that houses numerous series to cover mental health, empowerment, podcast framework, and various intimate theories to get to know the hosts. Along with occasional movies reviews and dives in pop culture with our event podcast episodes. The Uncommon Place digs into bringing guests on that stories don't fit the mold and are very different. WV stands for the great state of West Virginia, and every quarter we cover something in West Virginia. Stacey and myself, JR, are your hosts, so please come along for this venture to our Uncommon Place.
Hey dude, what are we going to do about increasing our audience for our films? TikTok and YouTube aren't doing too well for us.
Well, now that I think about it, my friend told me about the West Virginia Mountaineer Short Film Festival on April 19th through the 21st over at WVU in Morgantown. It's happening at the Kennedy Creative Arts Center on that Friday and Saturday, and at the WVU Mountain Lair on Sunday.
Dang, sounds pricey to be featured at such a large event.
No worries, bro. They accept all forms of films, and the submission fee is really reasonable. In fact, anyone listening to this podcast can get a 50% discount off the submission fee, which brings the entry fee down to just $5. Not only that, but with this waiver code, you all can submit up until Friday, March 22nd, 2 weeks past the regular entry deadline. Just go to their Film Freeway page and use the waiver code WVM24.
Yo bro, I just searched up this fest and it's legit. They get anywhere from 250 to 300 submissions from over 25 countries. They'll be showing all kinds of films. Plus, they're going to have a free filmmaking workshop on Friday and a bunch of live multimedia performances on Saturday. I also hear they're going to be doing a live panel discussion with some video artists and animators about artificial intelligence, which, you know, pretty controversial, but also really important to learn on. So anyway, dude, you should really go submit your film.
That's sick. What's the link? I want to learn more.
Dude, just go to www.wvmsff.com. There you can find more information about how to submit.
Well, bro, it says right here that we can win a prize for the best film, and even if we don't win, we'll still have a fun weekend watching films with free popcorn and milk duds.
No way, free snacks? I also heard West Virginia has the best pepperoni rolls, so we gotta go.
Howdy, everybody. I'm JR, and we are back from a long hiatus. I've been doing these little intimate shows talking about TV shows that shaped and molded me, but now it's time to get back to what's the bread and butter, what keeps the lights on, what keeps everybody entertained with the show beyond the other things that I do. That's the interviews. We talk to engaging people, impressive people, people that have an adjective before their name and an adjective after their name because that's who they are. And today I have with me Dick Wybrow. I did not chop his last name up. Thank you, everybody that knows that I chop names up. And thank you, Dick, for at the very beginning giving me your name. And I will stick with Dick. I like Wybrow, but I know that I can stick with your name there. So, Dick, the nostalgic question that is always asked on the show, who are you and why are you here today?
I am, I guess, if anything, a storyteller. I'm somebody from the very beginning that I was very shy when I was a kid. I was somebody, especially when I came to the U.S. because I was born in Canada. So I was a red-haired, chubby 9-year-old that went to New Jersey.
Wow.
And that is a baptism by fire because I had a bit of an accent, a bit of a Canadian accent, where I actually pronounced all the letters and all the consonants. In fact, I remember being in a homeroom at one point, and I said something like, "Oh, what did they just say on the intercom?" And man, I got slayed. It was like intercom. It's like whoa, and I realized you got to say it just like you just woke up. Intercom. Oh, okay, good. Now I got it. But so I was a shy sort of kid, and so I got lost in sort of the world of storytelling. That gave me an opportunity to be able to express myself and to be able to find friends to some extent, the friends that I created. And that's sort of been that through my entire life and all the different venues I got into. I went from there. And then when I got old enough, I got into stand-up comedy, did that for about 3-4 years. Then I got into radio, did that for a dozen years, and then moved into television. And now I am a full-time author. And so that is my world. It's always been about storytelling and finding amazing characters, finding amazing stories. And the way characters interact with each other, because I find the interpersonal communication the most interesting way to tell a story.
Okay, so your journey from being a former CNN producer, rock jock, and a stand-up comedian to a best-selling author, that's quite diverse. And I got to tell you, that's very admirable. How have these varied experiences influenced your writing style and your approach to storytelling? And the reason I'm asking you that is because being so well-versed like you are what we call multimedia. If I hooked you up to a USB cable, you're Windows multimedia player.
Windows is good. Yeah, I'll take Windows. It's one of those popular formats in the world, and they're actually getting kind of better. And by well-versed, you mean old. I'm old. That's fine. I'm totally fine. I'm in my 50s now, so I'm old. It's funny you ask the idea of the sort of the evolution of the storytelling. So when I got into just like writing stories and stuff like that, I had struggled a bit for a period of time to be able to get published, because this is back in the day when you used to have to put a self-addressed stamp envelope inside your pitches, right? An SASE. So you would write a short story and you would send it off to some magazine or something, and then but you had to pay for the return postage, which meant that when that rejection came, you paid for it. So that was even kind of a bit of a double hit. So what happened at that point is I had this strange idea in my head, and I have a lot of strange ideas. It's probably because of the narcolepsy, but I have a lot of strange ideas. So my idea was I could get published if I write something in the afternoon and get up on stage and tell people these stories I've come up with. Then that's published. That made sense to me. And so that's how I got into stand-up comedy, because I would write these little shorts. Usually in that instance, because before I was pure fiction, and when I got into stand-up comedy, it was more about going up on stage and telling stories about, my life or observations and things like that. So that morphed the storytelling, because now instead of doing purely fictional worlds, now I'm sort of taking my world with a bit of a bent, right? And then when I got into radio, how that changed was I did morning shows and night shows and stuff like that. But then suddenly I had partners with me. And so that was a bit of a transition, because up to that point, it had always been me sort of like putting my thing there. And initially I was challenged by this idea that I had to sort of make space for somebody else. But then you start to realize how much value that is for you and for the listener and for the people that are hearing the stories or what's being said. And so that was a bit of an evolution, I guess, of my own personality. Because before then, with stand-up and then solo radio shows, it was like sort of like, here's me, I've got to entertain, I've got to knock this out of the park. But then sharing that space with somebody else. And that took a little bit, the idea of like letting the other person shine. And it evolved for me over the dozen years or so in radio, from just letting the person shine and then really getting into the idea of setting somebody up, of really enjoying this idea that you lift somebody up and have them knock it out of the park. And after a while, it started to almost feel better that way. I mean, I love getting a great joke or a great line in or a story, whatever. But it was neat to just kind of lift somebody else up. It felt really great. Probably sounds codependent, but it was really great. When I moved into television, then everything changed again, because television is to get as much of the story into a short amount of time as possible. So initially, I went into something called CNN Radio, which is not around anymore. And so there you're doing obviously news stories, but there's creativity in news stories. And I don't mean creative with facts, but there's a creative way to tell stories. And that's why some news shows are better than other news shows. Everybody's using the same facts. But so then I went into the television side, and then suddenly my short stories went from 1 minute to 30 seconds. And so you learn an economy of words, as they call it. And then I ended up working with the folks at HLN, or Headline News. And then the 30 seconds became, I'm not joking, JR, anywhere between 9 and 13 seconds. So you've got to
remember Headline News, yes.
Man, that was, I tell you, that is an education to be able to take all the stuff you got to say. It's like, summarize the conflict in Gaza in 9 seconds. That is a skill. And so it took a while to learn how to do that. So all along the way, all these iterations of storytelling have in many ways influenced the books I'm writing. Like the book I'm writing right now, Cain, I can see influences of each one of those moments. I can see where here's sort of an HLN moment where like it's a real short sentence or a bit of more of a storytelling. And that might be some of the radio or the humorous moments, which people seem to find the book funny, which I really appreciate. And that comes from some of the stand-up comedy. So all of that, like anything in our lives, all those experiences sort of make up who we are today and how we express ourselves.
All right, so I want to rewind real quick. You said the word narcolepsy. To me,
Yes.
sometimes it's seen as a hindrance to some people, but it became a driving force in your creative process. Can you elaborate on how this condition has shaped your perspective and contributed to the creation of your humorous supernatural fiction? I need that.
Yeah.
I need that. And listen, these
Yeah.
questions. Listen, these questions are real tight. I want to give a great shout out to like when we researched stuff. I was like, my virtual assistant that wrote that question. I was like, wow. I was like, nobody asked me things like that. I said, I want to know. I got really deeply invested in this question because I'm not familiar with. I know what it is. You know how people kind of like fall asleep, but I don't know everything about this condition. So please enlighten me. I need this for my education.
Yeah, of course. So narcolepsy is sort of different for anybody who might have it. And basically, in a nutshell, narcolepsy is just being sleepy all the time. That's really what it comes down to. Some people have like cataplexy to where like if you go, wah, they have narcolepsy and they're tired, but you make a loud noise and they pass out. You can go to YouTube and take a look. There's some pretty amazing displays of this. And then other people will just sort of fall asleep. It's not like, your head hits the table. Usually it's sort of a drift off. Mine is just being very sleepy all the time. And when I was younger, before I got diagnosed, it was frustrating because I thought this was what life was like. I thought life was always being tired. And if you don't, and you couldn't know what narcolepsy is like. Somebody once described it to me as stay up for 30 hours, now go to work. And then now when you're done with work, come home and make dinner. And now after dinner's done, sit down and chat with your spouse until you go to bed. And so that is a bit of an idea, apparently, about what narcolepsy can feel like for people. And so when I finally got the diagnosis, it was great in the sense that I knew what that little gremlin was. This is why I feel tired all the time. And so initially I was sort of not bitter, but a little bit negative about it. Like, why do I have to have this thing? But it's like anything in life, where you take a look and go, okay, this is with me. It's not going away. I'm stuck with it. So how can I put a yoke on it and make it work for me? And I started to realize that a lot of the storytelling I do, a lot of the worlds I create, like right now, I mean, like we were talking about Cain a second ago. Cain is about a wolf who gets bitten by an infected man and wakes up the next day human. And then when the moon comes out, he turns into a werewolf, unless it's, a different phase of the moon. A full moon is a werewolf in various phases of the moon, like let's say it was like a quarter moon or a half moon, he turns into a lesser wolf, which is a dog. Now that's the story basis, right? That's nuts. That's a crazy kind of story. And from what I can understand, people call it a reverse werewolf. But from what I can understand of it, that's never kind of been done before. And I attribute a lot of that to embracing narcolepsy. So when I get tired, when I get sleepy, I don't get as frustrated as I used to because I know that's where some of the creativity can come from. It's like when you're lying down to go to bed at night, JR, and that there's that sort of state between wake and sleep, and you get those crazy ideas, and some of them are kind of really good, and you think, wow, that is really good. I should write that down. And then you wake up the next day and you can't remember what it is, and you didn't write it down. And so that state that people have right before they fall asleep, I'm in that state 85% of my day. And so now I take that as narcolepsy being a superpower because it gives me the ability to create worlds, create characters, and these interactions that maybe many others don't have an opportunity to tap into. So I see as a positive. So in the beginning, narcolepsy was this, as I said, like a bit of a gremlin. And now, though, I got that gremlin working for me. I'm riding its back onto the bestseller list. So yeah, I know you can't take every sort of challenge in your life that way, but as best you can, if you're stuck with it, all you can do is try and make it work for you.
Okay, and I like that. That right there was sharp for me. So, since you went on the topic of your book, Cain, let's jump over to that real quick. Cain presents a unique twist to the werewolf narrative. What inspired the reversal, and how do you approach reimagining classic supernatural tropes in your storytelling?
So Cain actually came from a conversation. I'd written another series, and I'd been worked in news. So you mentioned CNN, and then here because I live in New Zealand, I did actually New Zealand television for about 7 years in news. And so at some point I was like, oh, I got to write a book about news because I've got to write something fun in the news world. And so, but every time I interviewed somebody, because I do a lot of interviews when I do my books. I speak to other people, and I enjoy doing interviews. And so I would interview these journalists, and this phrase kept on coming up again and again and again. What is the definition of a story, right? And the definition, basically, the basis of a story is dog bites man. That's not a story. Happens all the time. But man bites dog. That's a story. And so that's a news adage. And so for some reason, that little phrase got stuck in my head. Man bites dog is a story. And that got stuck in my subconscious. And then my narcolepsy, I think, probably grabbed that and started bouncing that around. And that sort of is how Cain started. This idea, like, what if a man bit a dog? Okay, let's say, what if a man bit a wolf, right? And then the next day, the wolf turns into a human. So what would happen? Okay, so the man has something within him. He's infected with something, some sort of. It turns out he's a super soldier, and he'd been on this program, and whatever was put into his blood has turned this wolf into a human. And now Cain is trying to find this man who bit him because he wants to go back to being a wolf. He loved being a wolf. He loved running around naked through the woods. That was perfect for him. I mean, he could do that now as a human, but he'd probably get incarcerated and a good chance of some frostbite, unfortunate frostbite. And so, but also, and then, so the creative side of it, for me to enjoy it even more, because I didn't want to wait, the full moon comes out every 28 days or so. And so in my head, I was like, well, I don't want to wait 28 days to have fun with sort of this werewolf character. How else can I play with that? And so I just sort of sat, like I said, embracing the narcolepsy, and I just drifted off. And I thought, well, why is it just the full moon? Why do we never see werewolves come out at a half moon or a lesser moon? And that was sort of the genesis of one of the fun parts of this, to where when it's not quite a full moon, when the human Cain steps into the moonlight, he actually transforms, but into a lesser wolf, which is a dog. So people love the pug. People just love the pug. He turns into a pug in the book. He turns into a terrier. He turns into stronger ones too. There's a Rottweiler in there. And then in later books, there's other ones like Goldens and stuff like that. But that's been really, really fun to do. I've had such a blast creating this unusual world that people seem to like.
Okay. And with that, I'm like, wow, like that's crazy to even fathom, like switching the story up like that. So going in a different direction, because we talked about that, and I'm glad about that. Moving from Canada to the U.S. then New Zealand provides rich tapestry of experiences. How have you used these different cultural environments with your writing and themes in your books? Because the reason I asked that question the reason I asked that question is because going all across the continents with your stuff, and I mean, you went all the way to New Zealand, like that's like going to Antarctica from America. I mean, or going, like that's going literally all around the world. How did you stay focused? Like, because different cultures give you different auras, different vibes, so many different, like obviously just culture in general changes your perspective on things, because what you do in Canada, you necessarily don't do everything like you do in the US. And in New Zealand, if you went to Australia than New Zealand or anything, Fiji Islands, any of that, you've seen different things. So how did these environments help you with your writing and your themes?
I think I've always, basically since the age of 9 years old, I've been an outsider. I was born in Canada, but when I was in the U.S. and I spent 35 years there, whatever it might be, I was still not an American, even though I was very American. And then when I came here, even though I'm half Kiwi, I'm still an outsider, especially my accent doesn't match what everybody else has. But so that sort of experience of being an outsider in some way, I think has probably formed, affected my personality or even the way I write more than anything. Because surprisingly, in each of those locations from Canada, the US, and New Zealand, there are just huge similarities with people all across the board. There's a little difference in language. Like
Okay.
New Zealand doesn't say things directly with people. They kind of go roundabout, a bit of a show of respect or deference. I'm not exactly sure. In the US, it's very direct. It's a very different style of speaking. And Canada's kind of in between. But I mentioned this idea of sort of being a bit of an outsider. It was my wife who actually pointed this out. In all of my stories, my main characters in all the series and the writing that I do, my main characters are people that are not necessarily on the fringes, but people that are a bit of a square peg trying to get into a round hole. Right. And so I guess in some way that's who I've been my entire life. And I'm expressing that through the writing. And maybe there's some sort of, it feels good to me that these square pegs in these stories find their way into the round hole, or maybe they make their own square hole, but they find a way through that. And so I guess I'm in some way creating through fiction what I want my reality to be, some version of me sort of fitting in. And so that's I think that's been the biggest influence of moving from place to place, is feeling a little bit like an outsider my entire life. And then using a bit of that outsider sort of feeling and injecting that into my writing as a way to maybe feel less outside.
Okay, man, you're a personality. I want to give that to you there. No doubt in that. So now we're going to go back over to your radio and stage performance, that background.
Sure.
You hone those abilities to entertain audiences, and entertaining comes with a lot of incorporation of skills that you have to build up in childhood or in any part of adolescence. So can you tell us something from your childhood that something, if you entertain the grandparents, your father, mother, or whoever? When did you become an entertainer as a kid, and how did it translate to you being when you got older?
JR, it's all because of pudding. Pudding made me an entertainer. So I mentioned earlier, right? So I'm 9 years old, chubby little kid, red hair, sit down there in a Jersey school, right? And I'm the kid sitting by himself at the lunch table, and I was, to myself. And I admit that a lot of that, if you want to make friends, you got to go out and make them. I just didn't have the confidence to do that. And so as I'm sitting there at lunch, I'll never forget this. These three kids would come by every day, and they kind of mess with me, not in a violent way at all, but they would just sort of like, what you got for lunch today? And then I would stammer around and I wouldn't know what to say. And they'd kind of dig through there and pick around and pull my pudding out. And for a chubby Canadian boy in New Jersey with no friends, pudding was my only friend. And so I had to protect my pudding. And so these guys, I eventually started to think, I got to do something. So these guys came by this one day and they said, so what you got for lunch today? And I just snapped. It was a pudding enhanced snap, JR. And I was just like, well, I've got booger sandwiches and I got eyeball licorice. And I was just throwing stuff out there as weird as I could. And they bust a gut. They were just like, they thought it was hilarious. But the most important part here, JR, is they didn't take my pudding. I made them laugh. The power of humor, it sort of changes a dynamic in a relationship. If I can make you laugh, you no longer have power over me. For whatever reason, when I made them laugh, they would leave my stuff alone. They wouldn't dig in it because maybe they liked me a little bit. I don't know what it was. But so if I wanted to protect my pudding, and I did, I had to come up with something new every day. So here I was, 9 years old, shy as anything. And I had to write 9-year-old comedy bits about the gross out comedy bits. And if I would write something and it was funny, I could keep my pudding. And that was really the influence. That actually clicked everything in my head. And it showed me the power of humor, the power of storytelling, and understanding your audience. Because I wasn't going to do, these are other probably 10, 11-year-olds. They were a couple years older than me, but I wasn't going to do observational humor, with these guys. I wasn't going to talk about marriage. I didn't think about it, but I knew these 10, 11-year-olds would like gross out humor. And in doing that, I protected my pudding. And from that core, that understanding of audience, that understanding of humor, that's where all my humor sort of stems from. I think that's the beginnings of it. And the beginnings of my humor was pudding.
And I like that. That's elaborate right there, pudding. And that's the ground up work. Pudding probably moved on to ice cream, other different types of foods, and next thing you know,
man, you got to go to defensive mode. And you got to protect your sweet stuff. All
right, so you have an eclectic mix of pets, including a horse. You had an incident with that. How do your real life experiences like this peculiar incident influence you or find their way into your storytelling?
Well, I mean, we've got 3 cats. We've got a fish. We've got a dog. We had a horse, as you mentioned, because we were in New Zealand. We moved here. My wife is like, oh, I've always wanted a horse. And so we ended up getting a horse. But we didn't get like a new one. We went to the used horse lot or something. And we got one that was probably not all there. I mean, just not a very happy horse. And so, but got happier. She got happier hanging around with Tiff. But one day the horse chomped down on her hand, my wife's hand, and Tiff pulled her hand away and it took off the tip of her finger.
Oh, Lord.
It ate it. Right. That's the thing. And so we had to, at that point, obviously take her to the hospital and get her checked out. So she's got a little nubby top of her finger. But the most important thing is we could no longer keep the horse, of course, because once a horse gets a taste for human flesh, right? I mean, you don't want to be around that now. That's a man-eating horse. And right. So we I don't think that's true. But so we ended up selling the horse. But each animal, it's fascinating because when it comes to the horse or the dog or the cats, even the fish, they all have different personalities, and a lot of people know these. But each one of those individual personalities kind of influence my characters in some way. In fact, like I mentioned with Kane, when he turns these various dogs, he's actually affected by the types of dogs that he turns into. So he doesn't turn into them and they turn back and he's fine. He actually, when he turns back into a human again after becoming a dog, he takes some of those personalities. Like we've got a king calf and it's just energy all the time, right? And then you take a look at a golden and they're very sweet and they're very calm and they're very loving. And so all those personalities I can inject into the writing I'm doing, because as Kane turns into these various dogs, he's actually influenced by that. You could say stained, but that sounds kind of negative. But when he turns back to a human, he carries a little bit of those dogs with him. And so like after he becomes a golden, and I'm not giving too much away, this is in book 2, but after he turns to golden, he comes back and he's got more empathy than he had before. So that I really find fascinating and interesting. I mean, when it comes to cats, cats are indifferent. They just don't care. They just want you to feed them, pet them for 10 seconds, not 12. 10 seconds and then be done. So I guess in some way, all these animals have influenced the writing. Maybe not the fish as much. They're not as talkative. But yeah, all the animals in my life, just like people, influence what I create.
Okay. Now, the success of your Kane series has resonated strongly with readers. What do you think sets the books apart and connects with audiences on such a profound level? Because here's the deal. When you do something that is outside the box, which everybody tries to achieve that, but you truly have done that with this story, people recognize it. So what is it? I mean, what do you think the readers, these books, what sets them apart and connects with the audience in such a profound level?
I never set out to write something out of the box at all. I just set out to write a story. And it's funny, for as much as it is a story you've heard of the werewolf story, but not like this. You've never heard a story like this, probably, or very rarely heard a story like this. But I think that because these are people, there's a commonality there, right? It's because the one character I didn't mention is Imelda. Imelda is this former, maybe not so former criminal, and she's trying to get away from this crime family who's got it out for her. And she ends up becoming a driver for Kane. And so it's their relationship. That's, I think, what people relate to. For as bizarre as the structure of the story sounds like, there's a real human quality, ironically enough, for a wolf story, but there's a real human quality to it. And I'll give you an example. of how it seems that these characters touch people that I was so heartened by. So I do interviews, or rather I do speaking every now and then. Like readers groups will contact me from around the world, like Canada, US, UK, Australia. They'll say, hey, listen, a bunch of us read the book. Would you mind speaking with us about it? And of course, yeah, I always love to do that. And I was speaking to a group in the UK, and this woman spoke up. And all that morning, I was trying to write book 3, right? And I was struggling with something. I couldn't, I was missing something, I was missing sort of a theme or a piece or something. And it was really coming slow. And I took a break from that and I sat down to have the Zoom chat with these folks in the UK, about 20 people or so. And this one woman, I don't know if she said she was from New Brighton, but I always, in my mind, she's from New Brighton. And she might have said that, or I just like the sound of it. I don't really know. And she said to me, she goes like, I really love these characters. I'm not going to do the accent. I really love these characters. I can't wait to hear more about Cain for that year when he was growing up with his 2 adopted human parents, because Cain got brought in as a young teenage boy when he turned from wolf into a human. This couple brought him in and sort of raised him for a year. And so she was saying, I would really love to hear more about that. I can't wait to hear more about what his life was like in those years with the couple on the farm. And I said, well, exactly what I'm doing in book 3. That's funny you should say that thing, because that is what I'm doing in the book I'm writing now. And really what it came down to is that was that little gift that came to me by sort of that human interaction with somebody else, from somebody who's 10, 12,000 miles away. That little influence from this woman, this was her want or desire, but I was thankfully open enough to go like, that's inspiration. Right there, that woman has inspired me to put this sort of storyline in there. And that is a big theme in book 3. And I've since obviously spoke with her about it and thanked her for that. But that is, I guess, to me, shows me how people relate to it, because this woman who I've never met and will likely never meet, some years older than me, but she really loved the characters and wanted to know more about this one particular thing. And she was exactly right. That's exactly where this story should have gone. And so that's been really warming for me, this idea that somebody is sort of touched by that to such an extent where they wanted to hear about this little piece of it. And I could include that in the story.
Wow. That's amazing. Now,
yeah, it was pretty neat.
Yeah, on to a portion of the show. We used to do a show called Author Circle to help inspiring authors. So I want to ask you a question. As a full-time author now, how do you balance the creative process of writing with the demands of maintaining an engaging online presence and connecting with your readers? Because here's a catch. We had COVID happen, and when COVID happened, it put us all in these weird bubbles. Like, nobody was traveling, nobody was going anywhere. So you had to, even if you had PR or you were part of some type of marketing firm taking care of you, you still had to put yourself out there online to engage with people because everybody was at home. So what's your online presence like, and how do you connect with your readers?
So when it comes to, like, if we've got some people that are trying to write a book, my first advice is just write it. And I know that sounds like lame advice, but just keep writing. Write every day. If you can write 1,000 words, great. If you can only write a page, great. You can only write a paragraph, great. If you can only write a sentence, great. Just do it every day, because that actually affects your psyche. If you get even just a paragraph, you do feel somewhere in your head that you've made some progress, and it ticks your mood up a bit. So just write a little bit every single day of whatever you're trying to write, and don't worry about making it perfect. Just get all your clay together, as I like to call it. Get all those words in there, and once you get that big lump of clay where there's the end on the end of it, then you shape it in editing. But just keep writing. And when it comes to like some of the online presence and that, I block out a time where I'm going to do my writing. And that's usually pretty early in the morning. And because of the narcolepsy, ironically enough, I also have insomnia. So like this morning, I woke up at 4:30. And so I spent the first 3 hours of my morning just writing as much as I could, and take a bit of a break and sort of think about the story. And then the next couple hours after that, I'll answer emails and Facebook posts and that. And it's really rewarding. I don't see it as negative at all. I've got some amazing readers, and especially new readers who come into it. I had a woman just a couple of weeks ago send me the most lovely message that she was having a bit of a difficult time. Her dad was very sick and things weren't going great at work. But she said, I knew I could come home every day and spend a couple of hours in Cain and Imelda's world, and everything was going to be fine. Whatever challenges they met, Everything was going to work out. And it's sort of always a promise I make to my readers is they're not negative stories. You're going to feel good about it. I mean, it might take a while to get there for some of the characters, but the good guys always win in my stories. And so she had just said that it was sort of her little island, that in a kind of a difficult time in her life, that she went to these books and she's found this little island, a bit of island of joy. And JR, is there anything in the world better than that? And I know that's good for her, but to hear that as she's interacting with me on Facebook and that, to hear that from somebody else, to know that a story that I wrote at 4:00 in the morning in a 2-car garage in New Zealand is made somebody's life in the US. I'm not sure what state she was in, but it made her life just for an hour or two a night just a bit better. That's the greatest thing in the world. So I love interacting with people online. I find a lot of joy in it, and I don't seek out a lot of likes. I mean, it's not something I think. I always feel that if you're kind of like you're writing something, creating something solely for the likes or the comments, that really isn't the goal. It's really about connecting. I'd rather get something that had 30 likes and connect with people than something that's got 3,000 and they're just sort of hitting the thumbs up button because they thought it was funny.
Wow. So, all right, I like that answer. And man, Dick, I'm amazed. You could just the way, you could be a narrator, for, just anything. Now,
I tried reading my own book. So okay, here's a confession, GR. I did stand-up comedy and I did radio, and I thought I could read my own audiobook. I tried that. So I went into a couple summers ago, Kiwi summers. I went into a closet and read an old book of mine into a mic, and I recorded it and listened it back. And it was awful. Yeah. I'm not an actor. It's no good. Thankfully, Podium Audio is actually turning the Kane series into audiobook, so I don't have to do that because now they have trained actors doing that. But no, so if you love an audiobook, go check it out on audiobook if you're not a big reader. But that is not a capability that I have. I don't know what it is. When I'm reading on a page, after a while, my mind begins to wander, which is probably a lot to do with the narcolepsy. I don't know.
Now, what's next for you? What are some upcoming projects or things that you're going to explore in your future literary works?
I think I've got one more book that's coming out for sure. There might be a second one. I'm what's called a discovery writer, or to be honest, we call it a pantser. So I don't really overly plot out my books. And so if I get to the end of book 4 and my characters decided they're done, then it's done. But I think that there's probably a book 5. And so I've already got another series, because it's always when you're writing something, you sort of got something knocking on your head. I have another series that's sort of bubbling off in my subconscious, and it's telling me that it's cooking. Yeah, I know it's cooking. And that's something that as I got older, I've learned to really trust, and I don't get anxiety about it anymore. Is I just sort of let that cook. And when it's ready, the thing will go ding, and it'll tell me a little bit about what that story is. I have the basics of it, but it's sort of cooking right now, my subconscious. So I'm waiting for that to come at me. So that's really where I am at the moment. I'm finishing off this series. I'm having so much fun writing it, the Kane series. And then the next series, who knows? I expect it'll probably present itself sometime mid-year, and we should see a book sometime, I don't know, maybe August or something like that.
Okay, thank you for that, Dick. Now, a portion of the show we dedicate to a news magazine that came on TV. It's called 2020. It still comes on TV, but we're talking about the old school when it had John Stossel. He was a bit of comic relief. I don't know why I said comedic. Does not even work. Comic relief. And Diane Sawyer was poignant with her interview skills, almost better than Barbara Walters, but Barbara Walters was a star. And on this show, we do 2020 questions, and we do those because they make you a little bit more personable to the audience. But I will say this, Dick, and you're the first guest that did this. You made yourself very personable without me even asking these questions. So,
thanks.
So the amazing thing that happens here, are you ready for these questions?
I'm ready.
All right. The hardest thing in life that anyone faces is the definition of this one word, success. in my lifetime, I believe that success is something very simple. It's accomplishing something else that you didn't do the day before. Because I don't want to put too much context into it, because if we put levels to it and different things like that, you can hurt your psyche, you can hurt your mind. So, Dick, what is your definition of success?
I've mentioned some of it within this conversation. I find success in touching people. I'm not touching, you know what I mean, reaching other people. The success is when the woman in the UK who says, hey, listen, I'd love to hear this next. When this other woman in the US says, hey, listen, you've given me a bit of an island of joy. That to me is success. It's not about a bestseller list. It's not about the number of pages I write in a particular day. I really, really love just that interaction with other people. To me, that's a success, to be able to touch somebody in some way, to be able to connect with somebody. And it's not just, like I said, it's not just a one-way street. I'm always up for going back and forth, because that's the best thing in the world. That's the greatest thing in the world, is that human interaction. And for somebody who writes in a room solitary their entire life, I find the greatest success is interaction with other people.
I like that answer. Now, building on that, and I liked how you spoke about the notoriety and accolades not being a part of your success. And I really appreciate that, because that goes a long ways when you're out here conveying a message and presenting things to people. And obviously, you're great at that. You already know that. So here's the next question. What is the hardest task in your life?
The hardest task in my life is making my wife happy. And it's not, you know what I mean? I guess it's the most important task of my life, to be honest. I'll put it that way. Is, I get, like I said, I get a lot of joy out of sort of creating a bit of a world. Like right now, as I mentioned, I'm sitting in 1/4 of a 2-car garage, because in New Zealand, they carpet their garages. I don't know why that is. They just turn them into rooms. So my office is in 1/4 of a 2-car garage in Auckland, New Zealand. And the rest of this stuff around me, all this stuff around me, that's all hers. And I'm totally fine with that. I'm totally fine with that. But, she likes stuff looking pretty. Aside from me, she likes stuff looking pretty. And so I'll go out and make sure that stuff is done in the yard. Like yesterday, we were going through old keyboards. We had keyboards and old mice, and we couldn't work out which dongle went to that dongle. And so I spent an hour with her just plugging things into my computer with her, because that made her happy. And that was something that was important to her. And I think that's something that is, I'll say, not that it's difficult. It's just something that I really strive at, to make sure that I'm doing things and helping create an environment that can make her happy as much as I can.
Okay. Now, to wrap everything up, Dick, there's a special part of the show called the Shameless Plug. I need you real quick to give a shameless plug of every and any way that anyone can interact with you, buy your books, or just learn more about you.
Sure. Just go to my website. It's dickwybrow.com. You can do stuff on there. If you go to my Facebook page, I'm always putting videos on there talking about silly stuff. Instagram, same thing. And I think probably JR, you probably got some of the links. But that's basically the easiest way to find me. And if you want to get in contact, if you are a new author or trying to be an author, always feel free to send me a note and ask questions, and I'll do everything I can to give you what little I know to help you out. So, or if you're looking to read something, of course, go check out Kane. And like I mentioned, if you're an audiobook listener, I'm so stoked about this. I've got 2 Hollywood actors that are putting their voice to this. The first one comes out January 16th, which might have already happened by now, depending on when our podcast comes out. But check that out, Kane on audiobook. It should be. I've heard the beginning of it. It sounds amazing. I can't wait to hear the rest.
Okay, and I thank you for that. And I am JR, and this has been Dick Wybrow with me on our podcast, on the podcast, West Virginia Complex. I want to thank you for coming on and being so insightful and being so colorful and being so vibrant with everything that you told us about. And the greatest thing about this show is inside those show notes, the after podcast portion that I always talk about on TikTok and other places. You will be able to find how to meet and greet Dick, just like he told you from his website. And you will find out different contents that were spoken about in this podcast. So on that note, I challenge everybody to do this one thing. Be outside the box, be different. The testimony that I'm going to give real fast is that with Dick being outside the box and being eclectic, eccentric, everything that you can be in the great adjectives of creativity, they have made him a strong person. They've made him a person that is fun to be around. You can just tell by his voice, the amusement and everything that he's talked about on the show. So, Dick, I want to tell you to take all that, wrap it up, look in the mirror, make a shawl, make a robe, whatever you want to make out of it, and keep that with you, and always continuously give that to the world, because not a lot of people are here to give humor. Everybody wants to all be serious and all stern and always concise, like always just being straight concise, with no humor. Your humor in the world brings joy to people. Your books, your different way, your approach move people. So on that note, I want to tell you thank you for that.
Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate it. And I get, like I said before, I'd love to be able to give it to people, and I love to get it in return. So the idea that people are enjoying it is selfishly one of the greatest things in my life.
And on that note, I'm JR, and he is Dick, and we are signing off of West Virginia and Commonplace.
Please follow WV Uncommonplace on Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter, TikTok, where we have some great content, Facebook, LinkedIn. Hit up the merch store at onecommonplace.square.site. Join the email list from the website, and rate, subscribe, and give feedback from your favorite podcatcher. And lastly, thanks for listening, and tune into the next episode.